A Fox 5 exclusive, newly discovered and never before seen video of the king of rock and roll.
That's right, we've unearthed video from a trip.
In March 2024, 7 unmarked tapes were found sealed in a crate beneath Graceland's basement. When audio specialists finally digitized the deteriorating recordings, they expected to hear Elvis singing or talking casually with friends. Instead, the voice speaking shocked everyone who listened. It wasn't Elvis confessing his secrets. It was someone else, documenting a conspiracy that had remained hidden for nearly 50 years. Who was this mysterious person? And why did the tape shock the listeners? The box in the basement. The basement at Graceland was not a place most visitors ever saw. Unlike the famous jungle room upstairs or the music room where Elvis had spent countless hours at the piano, the basement was purely functional. Storage rooms, mechanical equipment, old furniture waiting to be restored or discarded. It smelled of concrete and age, of decades of accumulated belongings that no one had quite decided what to do with. In March 2024, Riley Keough authorized a complete inventory of everything stored at Graceland. Not just the museum pieces on display, but everything in the archives, the warehouses, the forgotten corners where items had been placed and never retrieved. She wanted a comprehensive catalog for insurance purposes, for historical documentation, and perhaps most importantly, to understand the full scope of what her grandfather had left behind. The cataloging team worked methodically, room by room, photographing and documenting every item. They found boxes of stage costumes from tours in the 1970s, crates of unopened fan mail from 1968, furniture from Elvis's first apartment in Memphis, before Graceland, before fame changed everything. Each discovery added another piece to the puzzle of Elvis's life. On March 27th, in a storage room in the basement's northeast corner, beneath a stack of boxes containing Christmas decorations from 1975, they found something unexpected. A wooden crate, unmarked, approximately 2 feet square, sealed with nails that had rusted over decades. The wood itself was water-stained along one edge, suggesting it had survived a leak at some point, though the contents inside might not have been as fortunate. The team leader, a woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in archival preservation, recognized immediately that this crate predated the modern storage systems installed at Graceland in the 1990s. This was original storage, something that had been placed here decades ago and forgotten. She photographed it in place, documented its location, then carefully pried open the lid with tools designed not to damage whatever might be inside. Inside the crate, wrapped in deteriorating cloth, were 7 reel-to-reel tape boxes. The boxes themselves were standard 7-inch reels, the kind used for home recording in the 1960s and 70s. But they were unmarked. No labels, no dates, no indication of what they contained or who had recorded them. The tape boxes showed signs of age and moisture damage, their cardboard softened and discolored. Patricia lifted one box carefully, feeling its weight, listening for the slight rattle that would indicate the tape had come loose from its reel. She opened it slowly. The tape inside was intact, still wound properly, though the edges showed brownish discoloration that suggested the beginning of decomposition. Magnetic tape had a lifespan, especially in less than ideal storage conditions. These tapes were dying, their information degrading with each passing year. She contacted Riley immediately. 7 unmarked tapes, discovered in sealed storage, origin unknown. They could contain anything or nothing. Could be Elvis singing, practicing recording song ideas. Could be family conversations, business meetings, private moments captured accidentally when someone forgot to turn off the recording equipment. Or they could be blank, recorded over, or too damaged to play. Riley authorized immediate professional preservation. The tapes were too fragile to risk playing on vintage equipment. Instead, they would be sent to a specialized audio restoration facility that worked with historical recordings, a company that had previously restored recordings for the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian. They had the technology to digitize even severely damaged tapes, to extract whatever information remained before the magnetic particles that held those sounds crumbled into silence. The crate was sealed in a climate-controlled container and prepared for transport. Patricia included detailed notes about where it had been found, what condition it was in, and her recommendation that whatever these tapes contained, They represented a significant archival find simply by virtue of having survived 50 years in basement storage. No one suspected yet that the voices captured on those tapes would force a complete reevaluation of Elvis's final years. No one imagined that the person speaking would be someone other than Elvis himself. And no one could have predicted that what those tapes contained would be more valuable and more dangerous than anything else ever found at Graceland. Elvis's recording habit. Elvis Presley had loved recording technology since his first days at Sun Studio in Memphis. The magic of capturing sound, of preserving a moment forever, had fascinated him from the beginning. As his wealth grew, so did his collection of recording equipment. By the mid-1960s, Graceland had become a personal recording studio, with equipment scattered throughout the mansion. The music room held the main setup: a professional-grade tape recorder, microphones, mixing equipment that rivaled what many small studios possessed. Elvis used it constantly, recording song ideas at 3 in the morning, capturing impromptu jam sessions with friends, preserving musical experiments that never made it to official recording sessions. Many of these tapes had been cataloged over the years, some released as bonus material on albums, others held in the estate's archives as historical documentation of Elvis's creative process. But Elvis recorded more than just music. He had a habit of leaving tape recorders running during conversations, sometimes deliberately, sometimes simply because he forgot to turn them off. Friends who visited Graceland in the late 1960s and early 70s remembered seeing reel-to-reel machines scattered throughout the house, in the den, in Elvis's bedroom, even in the kitchen. Some were obviously for music. Others seemed to serve no clear purpose, just constantly running, capturing whatever sounds filled the rooms. The Memphis Mafia had joked about it, called Elvis paranoid, suggested he was documenting everything in case he needed evidence someday. Elvis would laugh it off, say he just liked having recordings to listen to later, that hearing conversations again helped him remember things he had forgotten. But there was truth beneath the humor. Elvis did document obsessively, did create an audio record of his life that went far beyond his music. After his death, Vernon and the estate managers had collected dozens of tapes from throughout Graceland. Most contained exactly what they expected: Elvis singing, Elvis talking about song arrangements, Elvis having casual conversations with friends. These tapes were cataloged, transcribed where relevant, and stored in the archives. Some of the musical content was valuable. The conversations were mostly mundane, interesting only as glimpses into Elvis's daily life. But not all the tapes were found immediately. Graceland was enormous, with countless storage spaces, closets, drawers, and forgotten corners. Items turned up years after Elvis's death, discovered during renovations or cleaning projects. A box of photographs found behind a bookshelf in 1983. Stage costumes discovered in a trunk in the attic in 1991. Each find added something to the historical record, but none had been particularly significant or controversial. The 7 tapes found in 2024 were different in one crucial way. They had been deliberately hidden. The crate they were sealed in had been placed beneath other storage, not simply set aside and forgotten. Someone had put those tapes in that basement storage room and ensured they would not be easily discovered. The question was who and why. Elvis himself might have hidden them, keeping certain recordings separate from his regular archive. Vernon could have discovered them after Elvis's death and decided they were too sensitive to include in the official inventory, just as he had done with the second journal. Or someone else entirely. Someone who had access to Graceland in the years after Elvis died might have taken recordings from the main archive and concealed them for reasons of their own. The tape boxes themselves offered no clues. Standard commercial boxes, the kind that came with blank recording tape purchased at any electronics store. No manufacturer markings visible after decades of moisture damage. No handwriting, no dates. Nothing to indicate when they had been recorded or what they contained. The only way to know would be to play them. To carefully, painstakingly transfer whatever information remained on those degrading magnetic strips to digital format before time and chemistry erased it forever. The audio restoration company promised they could do it, could extract sound from even severely damaged tape. But they warned that the process would take months. that some sections might be unrecoverable, that what emerged might be disappointing or incomprehensible. Riley authorized the work, driven by the same curiosity that had led her to open Elvis's safe, to search for the missing journal, to understand her grandfather beyond the legend. She expected music, perhaps some interesting conversations, maybe nothing at all. She had no idea that the voices on those tapes would reveal a conspiracy that had remained hidden for nearly 50 years. The digitization process. The audio restoration company was located in Nashville, a nondescript building in an industrial park that gave no indication of the historical treasures preserved within its walls. The company, called Sonic Heritage Restoration, had worked on everything from cylinder recordings from the 1890s to damaged tapes recovered from house fires and floods. Their specialty was making the impossible possible, extracting sound from sources that seemed beyond recovery. Riley delivered the tapes personally on April 5, 2024, accompanied by her estate lawyer and a security specialist. The company's lead technician, a man named David Morrison, who had spent 30 years in audio restoration, examined each tape with the reverence of an archaeologist handling ancient artifacts. He explained the challenges they faced. Magnetic tape degraded over time, the oxide coating that held the recorded information flaking away, humidity and temperature fluctuations accelerating the process. These particular tapes showed signs of having survived a water incident, probably the leak that had stained the wooden crate. Water was particularly damaging to magnetic tape, causing the layers to stick together, creating dropouts where information was simply gone. David estimated they might recover 70 to 80% of what had originally been recorded, but some sections would be lost forever, replaced by silence or distorted noise. The restoration process would involve several steps. First, the tapes would be carefully cleaned, removing decades of accumulated dust and debris. Then they would be baked, a process that temporarily stabilized the degrading oxide coating by gently heating the tape in a specialized oven. This gave them a narrow window, sometimes just hours, when the tape could be played without shedding particles that would destroy both the tape and the playback equipment. During that window, each tape would be played once, just once, on equipment designed to be as gentle as possible. The audio would be captured digitally at the highest possible quality. After that single playback, the original tape would be sealed in archival storage, never to be played again. The digital files would become the permanent record of whatever those tapes contained. David estimated the entire process would take 8 to 10 weeks. Each tape required days of preparation, careful monitoring during the baking process, and meticulous attention during the actual transfer. Riley signed contracts that included strict confidentiality agreements, ensuring that whatever the tapes contained would remain private until she decided otherwise. The first tape went into the baking oven on April 12th. David explained that he would start with a tape that appeared to be in the best condition, using it to establish their process before attempting the more damaged reels. Riley chose not to be present for the actual digitization, trusting David's expertise, not wanting to hover over his shoulder during work that required absolute concentration. On April 14th, David called her. His voice carried an unusual tension, something between excitement and apprehension. The first tape had been successfully digitized. The audio quality was better than expected, remarkably clear considering the age and condition. But there was something Riley needed to hear immediately, something David couldn't adequately describe over the phone. She needed to come to Nashville, needed to listen to this recording herself, because what it contained changed everything they thought they knew about Elvis's final years. The first voice. Riley arrived at Sonic Heritage Restoration the next morning, April 15th, accompanied only by her estate lawyer. David Morrison met them in the reception area, his expression grave. He led them to a private listening room, soundproofed and isolated from the rest of the facility. Inside, a high-end audio system was already set up, a laptop connected to professional studio monitors. David explained before playing anything. The tape had been recorded sometime in the summer of 1977, probably July or early August, based on references made during the conversation. The recording quality was excellent, suggesting professional equipment, probably the setup in Elvis's music room at Graceland. The tape had captured approximately 45 minutes of conversation, with only minor dropouts from water damage. But the voice speaking for most of that 45 minutes was not Elvis Presley. Elvis appeared on the tape briefly, maybe 5 minutes total, asking questions, making short comments. The primary speaker was someone else entirely, someone whose presence at Graceland during that period, having that particular conversation, raised questions that Riley was not prepared to answer. David pressed play. Static crackled through the speakers, then cleared. The first voice was Elvis, unmistakable despite the decades, speaking in the slow drawl that millions would recognize instantly. He said something about making sure the levels were right, about wanting a clear recording. Then a second voice responded, deeper, more formal, belonging to a man who was clearly uncomfortable being recorded. Riley leaned forward. She recognized that second voice, not personally, but from documentaries, from news footage, from the trial that had dominated headlines in 1980. The voice belonged to Dr. George Nikopoulos, Elvis's personal physician, the man who would later be charged with overprescribing medications, the man whose medical license would eventually be revoked, the man many blamed for contributing to Elvis's death. But this recording predated Elvis's death by weeks, perhaps only days, and what Dr. Nick was saying, what he was documenting in careful, deliberate detail, was a confession. He was describing the prescriptions he had written, explaining which medications came from legitimate medical need and which came from pressure by Elvis's management. He was naming other doctors who had supplied medications without proper examination. He was detailing the amounts, the combinations, the dangerous interactions he had warned about repeatedly, and he was doing it at Elvis's request. This was not an unauthorized recording, not something captured secretly. Elvis was conducting an interview, asking specific questions, ensuring that Dr. Nick's answers were clear and complete. Elvis was creating a record, documenting the pharmaceutical nightmare that had consumed his life, preserving testimony that could be used as evidence if he ever found the courage to expose what was happening to him. The tape continued for another 40 minutes, Dr. Nick's voice growing more emotional as he described watching Elvis's health deteriorate, feeling powerless to stop it, trapped between his medical ethics and the machinery of fame that demanded Elvis keep performing regardless of cost. By the end, both men were speaking in hushed tones, aware of the explosive nature of what they had just recorded. What the tapes contained over the next 6 weeks, David Morrison digitized all 7 tapes. Each one revealed another layer of the systematic documentation Elvis had been conducting in the final months of his life. The recordings spanned from May 1977 through early August, just days before his death on August 16. The second tape contained a conversation with one of Elvis's longtime bodyguards, a man who had protected him since the early 1960s. The guard spoke about incidents he had witnessed, times when Elvis had collapsed backstage, moments when medications had been delivered through back channels to avoid official documentation. He described finding Elvis unconscious in his bedroom on multiple occasions, calling for help, then being instructed by management to keep quiet about what he had seen. His voice broke several times during the recording, the weight of years of silence finally released. The third tape featured Elvis's tour manager, the man responsible for scheduling performances and coordinating with promoters. He explained in clinical detail how shows were booked despite Elvis's declining health, how management knew Elvis was in no condition to perform, but pushed forward anyway, because cancellations would result in financial penalties too severe to accept. He described conversations where Elvis's well-being was weighed against profit margins, where the decision was made repeatedly to prioritize revenue over recovery. The fourth and fifth tapes returned to Dr. Nick, recorded on different dates, adding more details to his initial testimony. He named other doctors in Memphis and Los Angeles who had prescribed to Elvis without consulting him, creating dangerous combinations that no single physician could monitor or control. He spoke about attempts to get Elvis into proper rehabilitation facilities, proposals that were rejected by management because they would interrupt the touring schedule. The sixth tape contained something unexpected. Elvis himself speaking alone, recording his own thoughts late at night. His voice was slurred, whether from exhaustion or medication was unclear, but his words were deliberate. He talked about feeling trapped, about understanding that the people around him were killing him slowly while claiming to protect him. He spoke about his daughter, Lisa Marie, about wanting her to know the truth someday, about hoping these tapes would survive him and tell a story he might not live to tell himself. The 7th tape was the most mysterious. Water damage had destroyed significant portions. What remained were fragments of a conversation between Elvis and someone whose voice was too distorted to identify with certainty. They discussed hiding the recordings, keeping them separate from the regular archive at Graceland, ensuring they would not be found and destroyed by people who might be implicated. Elvis mentioned a location, but that section was lost to damage, dissolving into static and silence. Taken together, the 7 tapes represented a deliberate documentation project. Elvis had been building a case against the system that surrounded him, collecting testimony from people who had witnessed his destruction. He was creating evidence that could support legal action, that could expose the conspiracy of enablement, that prioritized his productivity over his survival. But Elvis had died before he could use the recordings, and someone had hidden them in a sealed crate in the basement, removed from the official archive, kept secret for nearly 50 years. The authentication battle. The first question Riley faced was whether the tapes were genuine. Audio recordings could be faked, manipulated, created from assembled clips of legitimate recordings. Before she could decide what to do with this information, she needed absolute certainty that the voices on those tapes were real, and that the conversations had actually occurred as recorded. She hired 3 separate forensic audio experts, each working independently without knowledge of the other's involvement. The first was a specialist who had testified in federal court cases involving audio evidence. The second worked primarily with historical recordings, authenticating everything from supposed wartime speeches to claimed recordings of early musicians. The third was a voice biometrics expert who analyzed the unique acoustic patterns that made each human voice identifiable. All 3 experts received copies of the digital files, along with known authentic recordings of Elvis and Dr. Nikopoulos for comparison. They were asked to determine whether the voices were genuine, whether the recording showed signs of editing or manipulation, and whether the magnetic tape itself matched the technology available in 1977. The authentication process took 5 weeks. The first expert reported that the recording showed no signs of digital manipulation. The background noise, room acoustics, and recording characteristics were all consistent with the equipment known to have been at Graceland during the 1970s. The tape hiss, the slight motor variations, even the electrical hum from Graceland's wiring, all matched what would be expected from recordings made in that location during that era. The second expert focused on the tape itself, examining the digital captures for clues about the original medium. The frequency response, dynamic range, and distortion patterns were consistent with professional-grade reel-to-reel tape from the mid-1970s. He found no evidence of modern digital processing that would suggest the recordings had been created recently and artificially aged. The third expert conducted detailed voice analysis, comparing the acoustic characteristics of Elvis's voice on the tapes to authenticated recordings from the same period. Every human voice has unique features: pitch range, speaking rhythm, pronunciation patterns. She found overwhelming consistency between the voice on the tapes and known recordings of Elvis from 1977. The same analysis applied to Dr. Nikopoulos, comparing his voice on the tapes to television interviews and courtroom testimony from later years. All 3 experts reached the same conclusion: the recordings were authentic. The voices belonged to the people they appeared to be. The conversations had been recorded on period-appropriate equipment in the claimed location. There was no evidence of manipulation, editing, or fabrication, but authentication created new problems. If the tapes were real, then their contents represented evidence of potential crimes, overprescribing medications, negligence, possibly even conspiracy if management had concealed Elvis's condition from insurance companies or concert promoters. Most of those involved were now dead, but some were still alive, elderly but legally vulnerable to the accusations captured on 50-year-old magnetic tape. The tapes sat in a secure digital vault, authenticated but unused, preserved but hidden, containing truths that no one was quite ready to face. Those who knew the discovery of the tapes raised an uncomfortable question. Who had known about them all along? Someone had moved those recordings from wherever Elvis originally placed them to that sealed crate in the basement. Someone had made the deliberate decision to hide them away from the official archive, ensuring they would not be cataloged, transcribed, or examined during the chaotic months after Elvis's death. The estate's records offered some clues. In late August 1977, just 2 weeks after Elvis died, Vernon Presley had ordered a complete inventory of all recording equipment at Graceland. The official documentation showed that dozens of tapes had been collected from the music room, Elvis's bedroom, and various other locations throughout the mansion. But the inventory also contained a curious note in Vernon's handwriting: personal recordings secured separately per EP wishes. EP Elvis Presley. Vernon had found recordings that Elvis specifically wanted kept separate from everything else. The note suggested Elvis had given his father instructions, perhaps verbally, about certain tapes that needed special handling. Vernon had followed those instructions, removing the tapes from the general collection and hiding them in a location where they would not be discovered accidentally. But Vernon had died in 1979, taking whatever knowledge he possessed about the tape's location to his grave. Or had he? The estate's files from that period showed that in the months before his death, Vernon had spent considerable time organizing Elvis's affairs, creating detailed notes about various items and their significance. He had been preparing for his own passing, trying to leave clear instructions for whoever would manage the estate after him. Riley found evidence that Vernon had met privately with Priscilla at least 3 times in early 1979, meetings that were not documented in official estate business records. No one knew what they had discussed during those meetings, but the timing suggested Vernon might have been sharing information about sensitive materials, explaining where certain items were located and why they had been hidden. If Priscilla had known about the tapes, she had chosen to leave them hidden. She had overseen Graceland's transformation into a museum, had managed the estate through decades of challenges, and had never mentioned recordings that contained evidence of the system that had destroyed Elvis. That silence suggested a deliberate choice, a decision that some truths were too dangerous to reveal, that protecting Elvis's legacy required protecting the secrets he had tried to document. The pattern was clear. Knowledge of the tapes had been passed down carefully, shared only with those deemed trustworthy enough to understand the burden of that knowledge and responsible enough to keep it hidden. The weight of voices. 5 months after the tapes were digitized, Riley sat in her office at Graceland, listening to them again. She had played them dozens of times now, each listening revealing new details, new implications, new questions about what her grandfather had been trying to achieve in those final desperate months. The tapes represented something profound about fame and its costs. Elvis had been one of the most documented people in history, photographed constantly, recorded endlessly, his every public moment preserved for posterity. Yet his private truth, the reality of his suffering and the system that enabled it, had remained hidden behind layers of management and legal protection and willful ignorance. Even when Elvis tried to document that truth himself, even when he created his own evidence and testimony, the machinery of his fame had suppressed it. The tapes had been hidden, sealed away, kept secret for nearly 50 years. The people whose voices were captured admitting their roles in Elvis's destruction had faced minimal consequences, their reputations largely intact, their careers continuing long after Elvis was gone. What struck Riley most powerfully was the sound of her grandfather's voice on the 6th tape, speaking alone in the darkness, aware of his own decline, trying desperately to leave behind some record of what had really happened to him. He had known he was dying, had understood that the people around him were prioritizing profit over his survival, and he had tried to document it, to create evidence that might someday lead to accountability, or at least to truth. But accountability had never come. The system that destroyed Elvis had continued operating, claiming other performers, other artists whose need to keep producing outweighed their need to heal. The tapes documented not just Elvis's personal tragedy, but a broader pattern of exploitation that treated human beings as products, valued only for what they could generate rather than who they were. Riley understood now that releasing the tapes would accomplish nothing meaningful. The people responsible were mostly dead. The legal statutes had long since expired. The entertainment industry had evolved, though perhaps not as much as anyone wanted to believe. The tapes would create scandal, generate headlines, damage reputations of estates and families, but they would not bring justice. They would not undo what had been done. The voices captured on those 7 reels of magnetic tape would remain voices crying out from the past, documenting a tragedy that could not be prevented and a system that could not be stopped. The 7 tapes remain in Riley Keough's private archive, authenticated but unreleased, their contents known only to a handful of people who have signed confidentiality agreements. Whether they will ever be made public remains an open question, one that balances historical truth against the privacy of the dead and the protection of those still living.